You won't be flying through stars tonight, but standing watch beside a wind-worn castle wall where the North Sea whispers warnings in the dark. No lightning, no fury, just mystic and careful pressing against the stone like an old secret that forgot why it was urgent. Every drop that lands on the rampart already knows how the night ends, and isn't in a hurry to tell. If your room is still, let it stay that way. Dim the lights. Let the hush settle over you like soft moss. What you'll hear tonight won't ask for attention, it will simply be there, like the rhythm of someone else's breath beside you, slow and sure. This isn't history as thunder. It's memory as a quiet drumbeat, gentle, low, insistent. A gull cries once, then thinks better of it. The torch at your elbow flickers not for drama, but because the wind is tired of holding still. Somewhere below, the sea is writing its name on the rocks again, over and over, hoping this time someone reads it. If stories like this make sleep come a little easier, feel free to subscribe or just write your time and place in the comments. Who knows? The next storm might start exactly where yours ends. Now, there's a shape moving through the mist, and something waits at the wall. The wind off the North Sea drapes itself over the stone, the way a cat drapes across a windowsill. Heavy, deliberate, convinced of its own elegance. Lichen has made modest real estate deals with every mortar seam, trading color for patience, and the rough parapet wears a soft green collar as payment. Somewhere deep inside the keep, water trickles through an ancient gutter spout that an optimistic mason once shaped like a lion. The lion now looks perpetually surprised by its own dribble, as though still waiting to roar. Even gulls, normally dedicated to commentary, keep their voices pocketed in the grayness because the air already groans with enough old secrets. When moonlight remembers to appear, it limps over the wall, loses courage halfway, and wanders back behind the clouds, leaving a half impression like an unfinished thought set aside for morning tea. Asterisk. The man who patrols these walls in 1590 carries a notebook hidden beneath a drab wool cloak, its pages prickled with sigils no one else understands. He calls them weather marks for the king's safety, though there is more ink devoted to crooked moons and coiling snakes than to barometric notes. In the margin, he's drawn a compass rose that points politely nowhere, perhaps to remind himself that suspicion should never walk a straight line. He stops near a window slit, checks the angle of the stars against the smudge of his thumb, and writes the single word, whisperance, which isn't quite a word at all but feels sufficiently. Secret. Later historians will puzzle over his spelling, wondering whether mischief can be measured in misplaced vowels. For now, the quill scritches like a sleepy cricket, and the ink dries into tiny black ridges that catch the lantern and light the way. Frost catches dawn. If a modern project manager saw this diary, she might call it low-fidelity wireframing for paranoia, then schedule a follow-up meeting nobody wants. Instead, the diary is slipped back under the cloak, close to the heart, possibly to keep it warm, more likely so it can listen till midnight settles into the kirkyard with a thud too soft to rattle shutters. Though a few loose panes click together, like villagers sharing rumors under blankets. Inside the stone chamber designated for truth-finding, 3 candles lean at different heights, convinced they are conversationalists. Each flame shivers whenever someone exhales, producing little conspiracies of shadow that dart up the wall and regroup behind the tapestries. The townsfolk have been invited, some would say recruited, to observe an interrogation that will decide whether odd dreams can be taxed as treason. Nobody volunteers for the first question because the floorboards are busy rehearsing creaks, and interruptions feel rude. When the magistrate finally speaks, his sentence ambles out in fragments, pausing between clauses as though it must pay tolls at invisible bridges. One curious spectator counts the gaps and thinks they align perfectly with the beat of her own pulse. which feels like destiny but is probably coincidence wearing a borrowed cloak. The accused, wrapped in shawls that smell of peat smoke and resolved. Arguments simply nods whenever silence seems tired. Somewhere between knot 3 and 4, a wax strip lands on the magistrate's ledger, sealing a comma he had not written, which future archivists will misread as an amended confession. The room accepts this as gravity's opinion and moves on, far. Above, in the belfry, where ropes sway like underfed serpents, the thickest bell waits for dawn. But bells are not paid to keep secrets, and occasionally one practices early. A single bronze cough tumbles down the spiral stairs and spills into the corridor, startling a spider that was halfway through embroidering its own unsolicited testimony in silk. The sound rolls through the town, nudging doors and coaxing a few. Reluctant hearths to shift their embers. Gulls stir, consider a brief union meeting, then decide collective bargaining can wait until breakfast scraps exist. Along the harbour wall, the tide drags kelp with the determination of someone rearranging furniture in the dark, confident the new placement is both practical and fresh. Fishing nets flap against mooring posts, tapping out a rhythm that could be Morse code for almost morning, if anyone knew Morse 2 centuries early. A single oil lamp at the quayside blinks twice, as if winking at its own reflection in the tide before remembering reflections are free agents, and may choose not to return the favor. When daylight finally exhales over the horizon, it does so discreetly, stretching pale fingers across the gull-filled shore until stones gleam like newly washed teaspoons. Church bells commit to a full sentence now, their echoes stitching over the bay in loops that tangle with each other but never not. Fishermen, unsure whether they have slept or merely paused, haul lines that glisten with dew pretending to be pearls. Every knot and every rope remembers being tied by hands tired enough to be honest, and honesty, like hemp, swells a little when wet. Smoke from breakfast fires rises in columns so polite you could use them to sight a level horizon, though. No one bothers because the sea insists on tilting according to its own humor. The castle walls, earlier so menacing in the mist, now resemble elderly bookends quietly propping up the sky. That secret diary rests on a sill where sunbeams warm its cover. Ink softens, lines blur, and the sigils yawn themselves slightly out, of shape, as if sorcery prefers the comfort of imprecision after all. The bell's last echo fades into the gull's gossip, the tide changes its mind again, and the town, convinced it has declared something important, though nobody can recall what, settles back into the measured breathing of ordinary daylight, inviting any listeners still awake to breathe just as calmly, just as slowly, for as long as morning allows. You might not expect the stubby metal tip at the end of an umbrella, the part that spends its life nudging pavements and dribbling raindrops, to have triggered months of parliamentary murmuring. Yet on a silvery March morning in 1872, a subcommittee of Her Majesty's Board of Inclement Habits gathered inside a damp chamber, smelling faintly of wet wool, to choose exactly how wide that humble ferrule should be. If you're still awake by the time we stroll to the inspector who tried, with heroic optimism, to weigh drizzle on a pocket balance, you could always subscribe, or simply let the notion wander off like steam from a forgotten kettle. The ferrules will keep measuring the weather, whether or not anyone taps a bell. Rain tapped first, rattling the window panes in polite applause, while clerks unpacked sample. Umbrellas from every county, stout county sticks from Cumbria, collapsible Parisian affairs that folded like nervous origami, and one speculative model from Brighton whose ferrule flared like a trumpet anxious to join a brass band. Calipers clicked, inkpot sighed, and somewhere near the fire a towel tried unsuccessfully to dry itself. Early measurements wavered between 10 and 12 millimeters, numbers so tiny they seemed to blush at their own importance. A solicitor suggested splitting the difference at 11, but a naval engineer countered that sea spray demanded 12 for dignity. Minutes lengthened into hours, the rain behaved like an unpaid consultant, and eventually the room settled on 11.5 millimeters, a figure just firm enough to discourage puddle infiltration, yet modest enough to keep cobblestones from feeling bullied. Factories received the decree by telegram. Ferrule diam 11.5 mm, stop thread depth 1/10 inch, stop blunt tip urged to prevent excessive. Pavement pitting stop. Toolmakers adjusted dies with the unhurried precision of monks, illuminating capital letters. Molten brass poured into molds and cooled into neat cylinders that wobbled down conveyor lines like disciplined caterpillars. Inspectors toured workshops carrying nickel gauges shaped like tiny coronation rings. A compliant ferrule slipped through with a soft click, while any rebel that snagged earned a chalk cross and sometimes a brief sermon on civic harmony. Smith swore they could hear the good ferrules hum contentedly as they were crimped onto. Ash shafts nothing loud, just the faint resonance of a job done to specification. Meanwhile, haberdashers updated window displays, arranging umbrellas by hue but boasting indiscreet copperplate approved diameter tips. One shop even provided a demonstration pavement brick so customers could test the new bluntness. Single file they queued, tapping dimples into the clay with the same solemn delight toddlers reserve for first footprints in snow. City streets noticed next, not by sight but by sound. Gone was the old staccato quack of narrow tips striking flagstones like impatient metronomes. In its place came a gentler, tut-tut, quieter, rounder, vaguely apologetic. Crossing sweepers commented that puddles now splashed inward rather than outward, saving trousers from abstract watercolors. A pamphleteer calculated that, across London, the new ferrules reduced airborne drizzle by several thousand droplets per hour, though he admitted the figure depended heavily on how one defined airborne. Rail conductors praised the uniform diameter for fitting snugly into umbrella racks without the customary rattle that once accompanied every bend in the track. Even pigeons, roosting beneath station eaves, seemed to appreciate the softer percussion, though their gratitude manifested chiefly as deeper, more contemplative coos. One barber, convinced the rule would change posture itself, offered lessons, an ergonomic swagger appropriate to the civilized ferrule. Attendance was thin, but the advertisement pleased him more than profit ever could. Of course, a few diehards resisted, claiming the slimmer pre-standard tips sliced when with superior panache. They paraded along Pall Mall brandishing vintage umbrellas as if auditioning for gusty heroics, but the new width proved so practical that resistance folded like crepe paper and drizzle. Second-hand dealers rebranded the outliers as heritage spikes and sold them to tourists seeking souvenirs of hardship. Meanwhile, the post office adopted the 11.5 millimeter ferrule as an unofficial postal gauge. Any rolled broadsheet narrower than a tip qualified for the cheaper printed matter rate, a loophole that pleased poets mailing manuscripts to indifferent cousins. By late summer, manufacturers experimented with colors verdigris green, gunmetal pewter, even a limited edition enameled an optimistic sunrise peach, but the diameter remained sacred, the calm circle around which variety could swirl without losing its center. Statisticians at the Home Office, eager to quantify comfort, noted a tiny decline in umbrella-related complaints, fewer chipped curbstones, gentler bruises upon unwary ankles, and a measurable drop in claims of umbrella duels, those accidental. Jousts at street corners when brisk walkers misaligned trajectories. Correlation is not causation, the report warned, yet it printed the numbers in a larger, happier typeface. All the same dawn in November draped the city in pure light, and pavements gleamed like freshly minted shillings. Commuters emerged, umbrellas ready, each ferrule pausing a heartbeat before kissing the stone tap, glide, Tap until 1,000 coordinated circles map the day's first choreography. Newspaper boys called headlines that dissolved into drizzle before reaching eaves. The umbrellas caught the fragments, storing them among ribs like fragmentary gossip. A lamplighter, finishing his rounds, leaned on the shaft of his own regulation model and noted how neatly the tip settled between two cobbles, neither sinking nor skittering, simply resting as though it had always known the gap was designed for it. Somewhere a clerk running late jabbed his ferrule against a paving crack and felt, to his surprise, no jar, only a mild nudge, as gentle as a librarian's cough. He arrived at his desk uncertain whether the morning had happened at all, or merely suggested itself like a half-remembered rhyme. Beyond the window, rain soft to mist, mist then to hush, and the umbrellas, their duty fulfilled, closed with a collective sigh of hinges well-oiled. The ferrules cooled, water beating on brass before slipping away, and the city settled into the damp, measured breathing of an ordinary weekday, inviting any listener still awake to match that rhythm, to let thoughts slow to the pace of raindrops, sliding from a standard issue tip until even the memory of umbrellas curls like steam and disappears into sleep. You might not expect a thin loop of bent wire to have kept more arguments from unraveling than any treaty ever signed. Yet one drizzly Wednesday in 1899, a patent clerk in Birmingham stopped to admire a desk scattered with unruly invoices and wondered whether a single sensibly curved paperclip could pacify them all. If you find your eyes still refusing to drowse by the time we drift to the engineer who tried, with perfect seriousness, to test tensile strength by hanging 6 paper clips from the tail of a sleepy ferret, feel free to subscribe, though please don't reach for the button too briskly. The clips, like most office supplies, have no wish to hurry anyone. It began with a delicate semicircle, as most calm things do. 2 soft turns of steel, neither sharp enough to scratch, nor loose enough to pout. Early prototypes came in shapes, much too imaginative for their own good. One curved like a violin scroll, another twirled itself into a shy figure 8, and a third achieved such confidence that it attempted a tiny crown on top, which promptly snagged on the secretary's cuffs, and was sent back to the drawing board with a note that simply read, "Too enthusiastic." Manufacturers discovered that steel preferred repetition, curling into identical loops the way bread likes even slices. A mandrel of precisely 0.035 inches became the silent hero of countless afternoons, guiding wire into the unmistakable double oval that would later be christened the gem. Each finished clip slid off the machine warm as toast, landing in bins that chimed like polite applause at the end of a very short concert. Clerks felt the difference first. Loose pages that once flapped like restless gulls now sat together in orderly silence, linked by a gesture so modest it hardly seemed mechanical. Account ledgers grew tame. Memos stopped staging escape attempts from entrays. Even the office, rubber stamp, began to look less necessary, as though ink were overstatement when a wire whisper would do. One bookkeeper, delighted to discover he could sort receipts by touch alone, spent an entire lunch break blindfolded, pairing invoices like socks just to prove a point. His colleagues pronounced the experiment curiously impressive and resumed the far more important task of eating jam tarts while the rain traced Morse code on the window panes, perhaps spelling out congratulations in drips and pauses. Factories soon produced tins of 100 clips each, every lid embossed with comforting geometry. Inspectors carried brass gauges shaped like elongated teardrops. A compliant clip slid through the aperture with a soft ding, while any variant that pinched or gaped earned a chalk X and a small lecture about symmetry being the mother of serenity. Rejected loops often found second careers. School children fashioned them into miniature fishing hooks for classroom aquariums, while one newspaper reported a seamstress who used misspent clips to trace perfect ovals on hat brims, claiming the Wire's insistence on returning to its rightful curve made every shape pre-approved by destiny. By 1904, the post office had quietly adopted the gem as a friendlier staple, one that left no puncture wounds in envelopes and could be reused indefinitely, provided the postman resisted fidgeting. Sorting rooms echoed with tiny metallic sighs. As bundles shed and regained their clips at each stage of travel, like travelers adjusting scarves when climates changed. The average clip was calculated to migrate through 27 documents before retiring to a drawer, where it would spend its twilight years holding together recipes or optimistic clippings about penny stocks. Statisticians estimated that, on any given Tuesday, at least 1/8 of Britain's collective paperwork was clasped under a single family of wire loops, tracing their ancestry to that Birmingham mandrill genealogy drawn not in bloodlines but in gentle curves. Naturally, the world attempted improvements. A Persian firm introduced a gilded clip alleged to confer elegance upon even the dullest memorandum. Reviewers conceded it shimmered nicely but still hid beneath papers, which somewhat defeated the performance aspect. An American inventor patented a triangular model that promised greater corner grip, but proved too opinionated, creasing pages with the zeal of a teacher folding reprimands into students' report cards. The gem endured, politely unthreatened, its double oval quietly chanting, the mantra of adequate friction paired with minimal fuss. One parliamentary committee briefly considered mandating paper fastening standards across all ministries, but the idea evaporated after a clerk demonstrated that any attempt to remove a gem left not so much as a dent, whereas staples behaved like small acts of irreversible certainty. "We favor reversible certainty," the clerk remarked, and the room, finding the paradox restful, adjourned for tea. Warriors saw the paperclip drafted into unlikely service. Soldiers tucked censored letters under clips rather than sealing. Them shut an unspoken agreement allowing censors to read with minimal mingling. Some officers bent clips into makeshift fishhooks, a practice later commemorated in regimental folklore as Operation Wire Lunch. Meanwhile, resistance networks discovered that a single clip, slipped into a folded corner of a map, could encode rendezvous coordinates by the angle of its inner loop. A secret language so dull to outsiders it slipped beneath suspicion like a yawn at a sermon. After peace returned, surplus clips rained back into civilian life with the quiet elegance of swans landing on a pond, and offices once again practiced the tranquil art of adequate attachment. The mid-century brought plastic. Coatings in pastel shades, butterscotch, robin egg, something marketed as euphoric lilac. These hues promised morale boosts and desk personalization, yet most were abandoned after sunlit windows melted candy colors into sticky optimism on fingertips. Steel, content in its silvery restraint, remained the favorite. A Norwegian manufacturer did, however, introduce a variation with one loop slightly offset, claiming superior ergonomics for thick dossiers. Tests proved inconclusive. Users reported the same pleasing click as always, followed by the same gentle tug to release, concluding that comfort, like tea strength, lives mostly in the mind. Somewhere in the 1970s, a quiet rebellion unfolded when a startup pitched the paper grip disc, a plastic coin that slid over page corners. Brochures depicted smiling secretaries liberated from wire tangles. The discs arrived, were examined, and promptly rolled off desktops onto carpets, where they disguised themselves as confetti awaiting non-existent parties. The gem looked on, unrolling zero marketing campaigns and yet accumulating fresh converts, one resigned manager at a time. A trade journal summed it up in a footnote: "Discs bounce. Clips stay." The new slogan fit conveniently on a matchbox and required no further elaboration. Dawn dribbles now across an office in modest modernity. Outside, pigeons rehearse cue-heavy soliloquies on the window ledge. Inside, a lone desk lamp pulls buttery light over a scatter of reports. The first clip of the morning is plucked between forefinger and thumb. It's steel, cool, and certain. It slides over pages, one breath, second breath, then settles. The wire's tension embracing paper fibers the way a cat curls around its own tail. Custodian and companion in one compact figure. A second clip joins, mirroring the first with ballet-level symmetry. Together they tame a stack that might otherwise wander into drafts, revisions, or caffeine spills. Meanwhile, the draw half a jar reveals dozens more, resting like silver fish. In an undisturbed pond, each ready to repeat the ritual. Their collective patience fills the room, and the soft yet confident pressure they apply to loose thoughts seems, for a long hush, to be the only type of pressure worth acknowledging. If your eyelids are tilting toward the agreeable wave rest, you may imagine those drawers closing in slow, padded silence. Feel the paperwork lying flat under the gentle guard of countless double ovals, every sheet breathing at the same unhurried pace. Hear the faintest chime as one last clip settles into place, a lullaby note made of tempered steel and mild intention. The desk lamp clicks off. Moonlight nibbles the edge of the window. Somewhere a mandrel spins in a distant factory, bending tomorrow's promises into the calmest of loops. Pages shuffle once more, consider escape, then think better of it, deciding instead to stay exactly where they are together, order, and free of all urgency until sleep claims listener and ledger alike. You might not expect the measured length of a wooden church pew to have hushed more Sunday squabbles than any sermon ever delivered. Yet, on a frost-nipped morning in 1763, the consistory court of Winchester, gathered beneath rafters smelling faintly of hymn books and damp wool to decree that every new bench and every rural nave must stretch exactly 7 feet and 3 inches from armrest to armrest, no more, no less, lest congregations drift into argumentative geometry. If you're still awake by the time we wander to the verger who tested elbow room with a loaf of bread and a very serious expression, feel free to subscribe. Though truly, keep your hands folded. The pews will continue their quiet arithmetic whether anyone clicks or simply sighs into the cushions. A scribe began by unrolling parchment over the altar rail, its surface linting the candlelight like linen left too long in a sunny window. Deputies arrived from every shire, sleeves dusted with sawdust and fervor, each carrying a sliver of oak to demonstrate regional virtues. Hampshire favored stout planks 3 fingers thick, while Dorset offered sappy beech polish so bright it reflected pewter tankards from the parish fete. A Welsh envoy, having misunderstood the invitation, produced an elegant slab of slate drilled with pilot holes for hinges, in case repentance required folding. Discussion rippled like muffled organ chords. The clerk tapped his quill until the ink shook itself awake, then wrote the magic figure 7-3 on a scrap left over from last year's baptism schedule. The number looked sensible, perhaps because it resembled a comfortable bedtime. Neither 6 nor 8, but something agreeably between. Carpenters received the edict by coach and by gossip. Workshops rang with mallet taps as templates were carved, a master stick engraved with tiny crosses marking inch and half inch, to be kissed against every fresh board before a single tenon metamortis. Apprentices learned to hold the stick, like a ruler and a psalm at once straight, humble, obedient. When the blade of a handsaw reached the 7-3 cross exactly, the eldest journeyman would nod and murmur amen, not from piety so much as rhythm. Shavings curled to the floor in fragrant scrolls, and one optimistic mouse lined its nest with a sliver that still smelled of linseed, thereby christening the first rodent to appreciate standardization. Villagers noticed next. On the first Sunday, after Michaelmas, the new benches introduced themselves like well-tempered strangers, identical backs, tidy hymn book ledges, and armrests wide enough to host a single prayer book but narrow enough to discourage wandering elbows. Those accustomed to sprawling found their spines politely herded toward geometry. The chronically stooped discovered a surprising kinship with verticality. A farmer complained that the previous random lengths had allowed him to mark his private seat by scuffing the end grain with muddy boots, but the new order brought anonymity as equalizing as silence and snowfall. Even the vicar felt slightly adrift, unsure whether to begin homily 2 inches nearer the chancel than his predecessors. He settled on a half-step left, declared it theological, and carried on. Rain spattered leaded windows, while parishioners shuffled to accommodate the 7-3 regime. Some tested the width with clasped hands, 2 hands, 3 if counting fingers, then nodded as though confirming an unspoken promise. Children, ever empirical, measured the space between parents by stacking psalm sheets until the pile toppled, at precisely the armrest mark. The resulting flutter resembled dove feathers escaping during evensong. The verger, seeking obedience, fashioned a gauge from a discarded U-ruler, one end notched for 7-3, the other shaped like a small shovel to collect neglected orange peels. He glided down the aisle at dawn, checking pews with the hush of a conspirator. Any bench found creeping past compliance received a discreet chalk tick, and a whispered warning to the joiner dot of course amendments emerged. One rector petitioned for an extra half-inch to accommodate local millers, whose shoulders, he wrote, bear wider testimonies of Providence's bounty. The court replied with a stern footnote about precedent being no place for brawn. Another parish fitted cushions so plump they stole a 1/4 inch from legroom, prompting speculation about whether stuffing counted as wood. The diocesan surveyor arrived armed with a plumb line and a grin, declared upholstery metaphysically negligible, and accepted a slice of plum cake to seal the ruling. Soon after, a tailor celebrated the clarity by stitching 7-3 into trouser cuffs as the new Sunday sittable measurement, promising trousers that knew exactly where knees should fold. Sales were modest but measurable, the way drizzle is measurable when one owns enough patience. Winter lengthened. Pew ends began to gleam where gloved hands brushed past week upon week, creating a soft polish historians later dubbed congregational varnish. Mice, finding the floor swept too frequently for comfort, were located to organ lofts, where the steady wheeze of bellows lulled them into contemplative nibbles. One snow-heavy morning, the sexton tested the alignment by placing a loaf of rye at the west end of each pew. If the ends kissed the crust without squeezing, he proclaimed the bench righteous. Only one pew failed, compressing the rye into a reluctant pancake. The carpenter blamed frost shrink, planed a whisper off the offending armrest, and left crumbs for the appreciative choir robins. Precision, it seemed, could coexist with crumb generosity dot by spring. The uniform length inspired social cartography. Courtships bloomed 2 seats apart because closer would breach equidistant courtesy. Rival families negotiated an alternating pattern reminiscent of chess: black coat, brown coat, black coat, brown. The rector claimed he could predict harvest yield by observing knot density per cubic pew foot, a science he called notometrics. His ledger shows an odd correlation. Abundant barley followed years when parishioners nodded halfway through Psalm 23 for exactly 4 seconds each. Skeptics argued the benches merely improved drowsing posture. Either way, ale flowed and benches endured. The Enlightenment tiptoed in with notebooks and calipers of its own. A Cambridge philosopher undertook a study titled On the Effective Influence of Equal Seating Upon Collective Morality, concluding that measured horizontals encourage measured consciences. He presented findings to 6 indifferent geese. Near the cam, an audience selected for their commitment to honking at irregular intervals. The geese ignored him, but his paper circulated among pamphleteers who boiled it down to straight benches make straight paths, a slogan briefly. printed on tea-tins before marketing, noticed nobody cared. Still, the benches held their peace, lining naves from Devon to Durham like wooden metronomes ticking through centuries of weathered faith. Decades dripped away. Hymn numbers changed their fonts. The 7-3 persisted. In 1830, a Scottish cabinetmaker attempted to export an 8-foot bench to Northumberland, claiming Highland tartan shawls required extra layering space. The shipment was seized at the border by an excise officer who, misunderstanding his authority, wrote an apologetic note in the margin of the bench and sent it back upriver. The note remains faint pencil on oak, too long for comfort, too short for novelty, try fishing instead. Modern tourists sometimes stroke the line, unsure why a pew in Edinburgh carries instructions about fishing, yet feeling somehow calmed by the pointless precision dot in the present. If you wander into any modest English church when no one's looking dust, dancing in a window beam, organ keys sleeping under a felt cloth, you may test the old measurement yourself. Lay a palm at one armrest, pace gentle steps to the other, and you'll find 7 feet and a little more breathing in the margin, exactly as promised by 18th century quills and carpenter's dreams. Sit, let wood warm under wool, and notice how the length neither crowds nor loses you. It merely holds space enough for hymnals, enough for silence, enough for an entire lifetime of shuffled "excuse me" as knees sway by. Listen, the building sighs into its own hush, the pew settles, and time, like a tired rector, leans softly against the backrest. If your eyelids begin their slow descent, picture rows upon rows of identical benches receding into candlelit quiet, every grain of oak remembering the original template, every armrest agreeing to end precisely where comfort thinks it should. Dust motes float in lazy parables, distant bells test a single note, and the pews faithful to 7-3 breathe along with you, reminding each restless thought that boundaries can soothe, that measured space is sometimes the shortest path to stillness, and that even a wooden bench can teach the world how to sit gently until sleep arrives and finds everything, at last, the proper length. You might not expect the humble iron shoe scraper, that narrow, almost apologetic bar that lurks beside old doorsteps, to have warranted an act of parliament. Yet on a puddle-slick Thursday in 1844, the Board of Metropolitan Thoroughfares convened in a drafty chamber that smelled faintly of coal smoke and resigned umbrellas to decree that every new scraper affixed to every London threshold must measure exactly 14 inches from claw to claw. If you're still awake by the time we shuffle to the blacksmith who tried with commendable optimism to determine mud viscosity by counting how many Dickensian adjectives he could wipe off a boot, feel free to subscribe or don't. The scrapers will go on performing their quiet arithmetic whether or not any bell is ever pressed. Rain had coached this gathering into existence. For years, omnibuses exhaled passengers onto curbs that sluiced muck so enthusiastically it might have. Qualified as an amateur river, merchants complained that customers tracked entire topographies of Fleet Street sludge into shops, forming small archipelagos on maple floors. Mournful innkeepers nailed random scraps of iron horseshoes beside their doors, then cursed when travelers tried to open ale with them. One alderman arriving late to the debate raised his trouser hem to reveal a brown tide line and declared, with Shakespearean gravity, "The city is ankle-deep in its own forgetfulness." Clerk pens hesitated just long enough to let that metaphor drip before noting it down. Measurements followed. The committee inspected a dozen candidate scrapers. Some curved like surprised eyebrows. Others bristled with Gothic tines better suited to interrogating breadcrumbs. They tried wiping boots across each prototype, left foot, right foot, and timed the mud surrender. 12 inches smeared, 16 snagged laces, but 14 coaxed a satisfying thwip, a sound not unlike a shy sneeze into a handkerchief. Decision sealed, they wrote the figure in a margin once reserved for prayers against fire. and the number 14 settled into municipal paperwork, like a house sparrow into chimney set. Blacksmith forges woke to the news with a shrug of sparks. Bars of wrought iron, 2 fingers thick, were heated until they glowed the color of philosophical marmalade, then hammered across jigs cut to the ordained span. Apprentices tested each piece with a wooden template branded 14. If the scraper breathed even a whisker past its allotment, the master filed it back down while muttering that precision was the only sermon London truly heard. Finished bars acquired modest fleur-de-lis curls at their ends, not for decoration. The guild insisted, but to prevent reckless boots from sliding sideways into regrettable splits. Cooling racks filled with identical silhouettes, resembling small bridges awaiting rivers. When evening cooled the cinders, someone discovered that a row of 14-inch scrapers, tapped lightly in sequence, chimed a scale capable of playing God Save the Queen. The discovery generated half an hour of forge choir before the foreman reminded everyone that patriotism rarely paid the rent. Installation crews fanned out at dawn, shouldering bundles of bars that clanked together like timid cutlery. At each doorway, they drilled 2 anchor holes into stone, slid the scraper in, and tightened wedge bolts until iron sang a single, low note of contentment. Housewives peeked past curtains, approving the new order even as they worried whether the bars would keep corner dogs from reading the morning news upon their steps. A baker on Cheapside claimed the scraper's width matched exactly the breadth of his longest loaf and used one as a cooling rack until officials noticed sticky crumbs on municipal property and issued a caution. Early adopters devised rituals: 3 scrapes per boot for clergy, 2 for legal clerks, and an undecided number for poets, who often arrived barefoot in protest against measurable things. Tailors counted scuff marks the way astronomers count stars, finding patterns that surely meant something until distractions like lunch interfered, weeks blurred into seasons. Rain persisted in its confidence. The scrapers darkened from black, to russet as iron politely admitted oxygen into its private affairs. Rust, however, followed regulations too. A uniform patina cushioned the edges, so that each bar felt less like a threat and more like a handshake. School children discovered they could balance pocket marbles along the upper curve, timing races by raindrop metronome. Mail carriers judged a household's punctuality by shine, if the ribbed belly of the bar still glittered. The family within had likely just departed, shoes disciplined. One pensioner kept bees in wall hives and swore the insects used the scraper to groom pollen from their legs. Proving governance occasionally benefits more than the species intended. Decades later, asphalt replaced cobbles. Boots grew rubber solace with revolutionary self-cleaning treads. Yet the 14-inch bars clung on, collecting thinner stories. A film of city dust, petals blown from forgotten bouquets. Half a theater ticket longing for Act Two. New tenants wondered why the bars seemed both too narrow for modern boots and too wide for modern purpose, yet no one removed them, partly because bolts had fused into philosophical permanence, partly because tradition, like lichen, holds fast when ignored. One council surveyor tallied scrapers still surviving on a single fog-sopped avenue and found 93, each separated by exactly the stride of an impatient umbrella. He published a pamphlet titled Linear Iron as Accidental Metronome, printing 30 copies and gifting 29 to people who instantly misplaced them. The lone remaining copy sleeps in a library basement, its spine uncracked, but its title quietly tapping beneath layers of catalog dust. Modern rain still finds those bars, pinging against iron with a sound soft enough to pass for distant knitting. Needles. Office workers, eyes full of emails, rarely notice the gentle invitation at their toes. Trainers swish past unhindered, carrying remote possibilities of meadow into foyers lined with carpet tile. Yet, sometimes, especially at dusk, when street lamps paint pavements the color of lukewarm tea, someone will pause. Perhaps a tourist glimpses the curl of metal and wonders if it is art or accident, then lifts one foot, then the other, letting city grit fall away in orderly flex. The scraper accepts without judgment, just as its municipal godparents intended. A faint rasp echoes between shoe leather and century-old iron, a lullaby note reminding the pavement it was once a river of mud, reminding the listener that small jurisdictions of cleanliness still slip quietly beneath the roar of buses. Should your eyelids feel the gentle gravity of hush, picture a nighttime terrace row where every stoop bristles with identical bars, 14 inches each, noses glistening. Under sodium glow, rain settles into its groove, tapping metal with algebraic patience. One drop, two, pause, another. Bootsteps fade, windows fog, and the scrapers stand watch like iron commas in an endless sleepy sentence. Somewhere a forge fire long since. Cold remembers the day it shaped perfect parallels. Somewhere a parchment note still measures the distance between armrest and certainty. And here in this soft and now, the quiet arithmetic persists. Puddle, scrape, until even. The memory of mud grows tidy, and thoughts, like worn solace freshly eased of grit, wander indoors and settle gratefully into sleep. You might not expect the exact height of a doorknob, just where your hand alights without thinking to have provoked a year of polite squabbling in dusty committee rooms. Yet on a wind-nipped morning in 1907, the Royal Board of Domestic Conveniences convened beside a smoldering coal grate to settle, once and for all, how many inches should stretch between polished brass and humble floorboards. If by the time we saunter to the architect who tried to measure social harmony with a spirit level balanced on teacups, you remain unsmoothed, you could always subscribe, though please don't let your knuckles tense. The knobs will keep there. Quiet arithmetic, whether any button is pressed or merely dreams of being so. Early houses were carefree about handles. Some sat shoulder high, encouraging grand entrances that felt like opening a cupboard over one's own head. Others hovered near waist level, requiring a dignified stoop that made visitors resemble curtsying flamingos. Builders justified the chaos with folklore, rumors that shorter knobs kept winter drafts from sneaking up sleeves or that taller ones discouraged mischievous terriers from pawing indoors uninvited. Letters of complaint arrived anyway, one from a vicar who bruised a rib colliding with an unexpectedly lofty latch, another from a seamstress whose new corset refused the angle demanded by a knee-level handle. The board gathered samples, porcelain, ovals from Bath, austere iron rounds from Leeds, a single crystal sphere from Brighton, rumored to echo faintly when tapped. Calipers emerged, clicking like distant knitting needles while inches were counted. 36, someone suggested 3 tidy feet, pleasantly divisible by 6. A shorter delegate proposed 34 to spare the elderly a reach. A taller one wanted 38 to preserve top hat dignity. Discussion drifted like chimney smoke until tea cooled to the color of melancholy. The compromise 36 3/4 appeared in the minutes as though it had always been obvious. A silent sigh wearing millimeters like slippers, ironmongers. Received the decree by telegraph. Doorknob center 36.75 inches from finished. Floor stop, rosette diameter optional stop. Ensure shaft length accommodates plaster variant stop. Lays hummed as brass blanks spun into obedient spheres. Threaded. Spindles lined up on benches like patient caterpillars awaiting wings. Apprentices brandished a new tool. The regulation stick, a pine baton notched exactly at the sacred height. Each doorframe, whether oak, pine, or hopeful plywood, felt the cool kiss of the stick before drill's word. If a hole wandered even, a whisper above the notch, the foreman nudged it downward with a mallet tap, and a quotation from Ecclesiastes about everything having its season, especially corrective blows. Finished doors leaned against workshop walls, ranks of knobs glinting, at a perfect midrib height, like medals pinned on imaginary soldiers who never marched. Householders noticed first with shoulders, not eyes. Returning from market, they swung baskets and felt handles greet them as predictably as punctuation. Letters of surprise arrived. One widow wrote that for the first time in 40 winters, she opened her parlor without shrugging, and suddenly conversation felt less like lifting a secret. Children discovered that, regardless of cottage or manor, the knob reached their noses at exactly the same year of growth, an unexpected rite of passage measured in breaths. A schoolmaster set homework requiring pupils to describe the philosophical implications of uniform entry. Essays mentioned democracy, cake sharing, and the relief of not guessing. Meanwhile, a constable reported that burglars grumbled about having to unlearn the muscle memory of varied heights, though he admitted this was hearsay gathered while they climbed into the Black Maria. The decree rippled to unlikely shores. Piano maker from Bristol fitted his showroom doors with keys tuned to the knob's elevation, claiming listeners decided faster when pitches aligned with elbow bends. A milliner used the height to size hat boxes, insisting customers lift parcels without tilting plumes. Even the post office adjusted wall letter slots, arguing that if hands reached knobs at 36 3/4, stamps should greet foreheads at an equal courtesy. One skeptical postmaster measured twice, shrugged once, and allowed the carpenters through, noting that envelopes weighed the same at any altitude. Of course, dissent tiptoed in. A fashionable architect unveiled psychological doors with handles graduated like ascending notes 33. Inches in the scullery, 39 in the library to encourage posture variety. Reviewers applauded innovation until guests arrived and played unintended musical chairs around the hallway, gravitating to whichever knob matched their mood. The board dispatched an inspector armed with a stick, who tapped each rebel handle, recorded its altitude, and left a calling. Card embossed with a single question mark. The architect, deciding riddles were bad for commissions, quietly revised the drawings until every latch surrendered to uniformity, though he later bragged that his conscience still opened at 42 inches. Winter proved the standard's sternest. Advocate, frost made timber shrink, but the knobs, anchored by machine screws, held position like stubborn constellations. Gloved fingers, confident of rendezvous, found their target in darkness, without chafing door pane into secret constellations. An innkeeper near York measured snowfall depth by counting how many inches of knob disappeared overnight. Travelers trusted the reading more than barometers because it tasted of anecdote. In spring, painters encircled knobs with tidy rings of unsplattered gloss, each outline hovering mid-panel like a halo for carpentry saints. One decorator timed brushstrokes to heartbeats, claiming the metric steadiness slowed his pulse. By August, he published a pamphlet titled Zen and the Art of Predictable Hardware, selling a dozen copies, mostly to relatives. War came and went. Knobs dulled under blackout soot, but never drifted from the ordained mark. After the piece, aluminium leapt into fashion light, silvery, slightly arrogant, but even these shimmering newcomers bowed to 36 3/4. A gadgeteer tried adding tiny clocks to each knob, so inhabitants can know the hour. Before entering, the gears proved allergic to damp hallways and rusted into eternal noon. The board issued no opinion, trusting gravity and condensation to enforce common sense. Decades later, building codes evolved to metric, translating the venerable measurement into 934.7 millimeters. Contractors, alarmed by decimals, rounded to 935 and carried on, while heritage carpenters kept the imperial stick beside their chisels. The wood darkened to antique honey, but the notch unchanged. University students studying ergonomics traced the history and concluded the height aligned with the average ulna of clerks born in 1880. Coincidence they celebrated with a tea towel diagram of forearms and door panels? Sales modest satisfaction. Hideout now, in the hush before midnight. Imagine an empty hallway stretching through time, gaslight fading to tungsten, then to LED, yet every door handle catching the same pale glow halfway up the stile. A janitor locks an office, knob turning with the soft click of secular prayer. A cat nudges a bedroom door, trusting brass where moonbeams settle. Somewhere farther back, a coachman in dripping overcoat reaches for shelter. Somewhere ahead, a night owl coder massages wrists at that exact height. The metal is cool, certain, yawning gently against latch and tongue. Rain percusses roof tiles, footsteps recede, and the corridor, lined with compliant ovals, settles into its measured breathing. If your thoughts have begun to wander like slow drafts along skirting boards, feel the sensation of palm meeting. Polished brass, its temperature borrowed from evening air, its curve inviting neither squeeze nor strain. Turn it once. Hear the latch withdraw with a sigh older than lamplight. Beyond the threshold waits any room you choose. Perhaps a study smelling of dust and quiet puzzles. Perhaps a garden shed where raindrops tick on tin. You step through, close the door, and the knob settles back to stillness exactly where tradition tucks it, ready for morning. Outside, the board's forgotten parchment dozes beneath archives. Inside, silence arranges itself around uniform geometry. And you, having counted inches with the drowsy precision of history's unhurried hand, may now let awareness loosen its grip, releasing every latch of wakefulness until sleep swings wide, soundless, and sure. You might not expect the diameter of a railway station clock, those quiet circles that hover over platforms, like patient moons, to have demanded 312 pages of parliamentary debate. Yet on a misribbon morning in 1892, the British Board of Public Chronometry gathered beneath sooty girders at Paddington to pick one single perfectly sensible size. If you're still awake by the time we click past the engineer who tried to calculate commuter happiness by counting echoes inside a hollow minute hand, feel free to subscribe. Though truly, don't hurry. The clocks will keep turning their modest arithmetic, whether or not a bell anywhere is nudged on. The first sweep of discussion belonged to coal smoke and uncertainty. In one corner leaned a clock face from York, gold. As a naval porthole at 40 inches, all confident numerals and mustache serifs. Beside it sulked a 30-inch example from Exeter, whose shy Roman 12s looked as though they might apologize for existing. Further along, a hulking 50-inch Leviathan from Glasgow cast reflections strong enough to startle pigeons. Porters complained that oversized dials lured daydreamers into missing connections. People stared up, forgot their feet, and stepped nowhere in particular. Small faces posed the opposite hazard. Passengers squinted, misread, and leapt onto the wrong carriage with the panicked elegance of startled otters. Calipers clicked, slide rules emerged, and someone produced a tin of Dundee marmalade to illustrate just how big a 5-minute slice actually feels. It tasted persuasive. After a pause soft as steam seep, the committee settled on 42 inches edge to edge, a number encouragingly divisible by both 2 and 3, which soothed mathematics and masonry in one breath. Foundries from Derby to Doncaster received the decree by telegraph. Platform clock diam 42 inches stop minute hand length, 20.2 5-stop hour hand 15-stop thickness of opal glass 5 16-inch stop. Brass patterns were filed to the new breadth. Enamelers practiced stenciling numerals at precisely 40-degree intervals, so that 12 perched at top and 6 side directly. Below, apprentices learned to polish the opal glass until it resembled morning milk held to a lamp. Each completed face, wrapped in felt, rang like a low bell when tapped to sound inspectors likened to the word almost. Testing rigs mimicked the tug of gravity on iron hands. If a minute hand drooped even the width of a coal smut, the face earned a chalk cross and a stern reminder that punctuality is heavier than brass. On good days, the workshop foreman pressed, his ear against the finished dials, and swore he could hear the silent tick of future departures, lining up like polite coughs. Installation followed with nocturnal grace. Between last sleeper train and first milk run, crews hauled the circular crates onto platforms where hawkers' cries still echoed faintly. Iron brackets gripped brick as bolts tightened with size. Once hoisted, each dial accepted its pair of hands as though greeting gloves already shaped by winter. At 4:12 a.m., an hour chosen because hardly anyone argued with it, all the new clocks were set together by a telegraph pulse that arrived like a collective held breath. In that instant, the 42-inch faces shimmered in lantern light, their twin hands nested at quiet edges of the hour, and railways discovered the soothing skyline of uniform moons. Signalmen looking up from levers felt a curious hush, the way barn cats pause when snow begins. Even the telegraph key seemed to click softer, as if its Morse had traded urgency for a lullaby. Passengers awoke next to the change. They tumbled from stairwells into platforms and sensed, without naming it, an evenness previously missing. A clerk from reading remarked that he could tell the minute precisely by peripheral vision alone, because 42 inches landed its numerals exactly where his subconscious liked to keep them. Porters timed tea breaks by the neat sweep of the second dot's shadow across opal glass. When it reached the letter W in Great Western, they sipped, confident no whistle would sneak up on them. Newspaper boys discovered shouting. Headlines at 5-foot intervals matched the clock spacing. Proclaim, stride, an accidental metronome that kept both lungs and commerce tidy. One elderly station master, inclined toward poetry, noted in his ledger that platforms now breathe in unison, exhaling passengers with the serenity of a garden gate. No one corrected him. The trains were on time, and metaphor felt cheaper. Then cold out winter imposed its own audit. Icy wind needled through the minute gaps between iron rim and brickwork, testing expansion joints like a schoolmaster prodding spelling errors. The new dials held. Frost filmed the opal glass, yet numerals shone through, black as ink on snow. Commuters ran gloved thumbs across pockets of breath, but kept heads high, trusting the hands to confirm that shivers were indeed. Scheduled for 7:08, a ticket inspector measured lateness by noticing how far the minute hand had strayed from the semaphore mast shadow. 2 degrees equaled 3 complaints. Any more deserved a pot of scalding cocoa for consolation. Eventually, the cocoa replaced the timetable as his preferred chronometer, reinforcing the quiet truth that precision, once embedded, frees minds for sweeter arithmetic. Improvements, inevitably, tiptoed in. A Paris manufacturer offered luminous paint so dials could flirt with moonlight. Trials revealed the paint glowed with the color of oversteeped absinthe and unnerved gulls, whose midnight circles became unusually philosophical. The board replied with a courteous non-merci. Then an American firm proposed a clever gear that shortened the second hand's jump to avoid alarming gentlefolk unused to decisive ticks. Committees tested it and found the new glide felt less like progress and more like hesitation wearing fancy boots. The 42-inch standard endured, content to measure only what needed measuring. Meanwhile, a schoolboy from Swindon wrote to the Illustrated London News, suggesting dials shaped like pocket watch faces to train boys in punctual fashion. The editor printed the letter, noting that ambition, like rail, runs straighter when daydreams stay on paper. Years slipped by on polished rails. Diesel joined steam, then motors thrummed where pistons once sighed, yet the opal rounds remained. Renovators replaced cracked glass, never larger, never smaller, while small brass plaques appeared at pediments. Conforms to the Act of 1892. Travelers rubbed the plaques as mild ritual. Some believed the touch smoothed journeys. Others merely liked the metallic chill. One statistician calculated that if every plaque's brushed surface were added end to end, it would reach from Euston to Crewe and back, a corridor of brushed. Reassurance, no one verified the claim. Numbers, like trains, may be trusted if they depart politely. Now, evening settles on a minor junction lamp's glow sodium, luggage trolleys mumble gentler gossip, and the clock above platform 2 stands. Exactly 42 inches across, its hands folding toward 10. Somewhere beyond the embankment, starlings rehearse fractals against a linen sky. Somewhere nearer, a porter wheels a crate of chrysanthemums that smell faintly of novels long out of print. You glance up, perhaps only in imagination, and the minute hand glides from numeral to numeral with the unbothered poise of a cat investigating windowsills. Second by second, the world arranges itself behind that opal veil. Announcements hush, rails cool, and echoes of earlier footsteps fuse into one long sigh. If your eyelids have grown comfortably heavy, envision a corridor of platforms stretching. Through decades, every dial a twin circling the same patient center. Hear the soft click of a minute hand meeting its mark, then another, each tick a pillow for thought. The trains may come or go. The clocks, satisfied with their 42 inches of certainty, simply keep breathing time in and out, drawing the night around them like a woolen blanket until even the busiest schedule loosens its grip and sleeps. You might not expect the dainty, just manageable width of a sugar cube, the quiet geometry that slips off a spoon without making waves to have incited 6 separate commissions, 4 regional boycotts, and a memorandum so long it broke its own ribbon tie. Yet on a stucco gray morning in 1848, the Imperial Board of Saccharin, uniformity gathered in a Vienna salon smelling faintly of damp wool and hopeful pastries to decide the cube's forever dimensions. If by the time we drift past the chemist who attempted to weigh sweetness and heartbeats per dissolving second, your eyelids still hover, you could, if you liked, subscribe. Though do let your finger loiter. The cubes will keep reciting their quiet arithmetic, whether or not any button is pressed tonight. It began with a mild disaster in a Moravian kitchen, a hostess, wrestling with a stubborn cone of pressed sugar, slip-chipped a porcelain bowl, and suggested to her hospitable husband himself a refinery director that bite-sized blocks might spare future china, word caramelized into lawmaking. Samples poured. In cubes from Prague, squarer than modest courtyards, rectangles from Budapest longing to be bricks, and daring hexagons from Milan that looked more philosophical than edible. Each specimen waited on velvet trays, glinting like winter sunsets trapped in glass. Officials produced brass calipers, clockwork scales, and a single violin string to test resonant density on the theory that the sweetest cube ought to hum. Middle C when tapped. Most offered a muffled thud instead, but no one wanted to disappoint the violinist. Debate seeped like syrup. Doctors argued for moderation. Too large a cube, they warned, risked tidal waves of tea and trembling temperance. Too small, and spoons would chase them around cups like dancers losing time. Bakers favored heft more mass meant fewer trips to the sugar bowl, a mercy during frigid dawns. A mathematician proposed the golden ratio, prompting blank stares from confectioners who preferred ratios of cocoa to chatter. At last, with ink smelling faintly of cane juice, a compromise settled. Each face of the cube would span precisely 11 millimeters, each edge crisp yet forgiving, and the mass so pleasing in ledgers would hover at 4 grams, give or take a sigh. The number felt almost conversational, not so round as 10, not so prickly as 12, but a friendly doorstep between. Refineries along the Danube recalibrated mold plates to the new gospel. Rows of molten crystal syrup slid into grids, cooled, and sighed apart with tidy exhalations. Apprentices learned to listen for the sugar crack, a faint crystalline pop marking perfect readiness, neither too damp nor smugly dry. Any cube that chipped while exiting the mold became sacrificial rubble for candied orange peels. An afterlife no one envied but everyone appreciated. Wooden boxes, stamped imperial size, traveled by barge and by snow-creaking cart to those marketplaces where grocers stacked them like pale masonry, 10 bricks to a column, 5 columns to a smile. Housewives marveled that each cube-fit teacup brims exactly like umbrellas meeting puddles, no sideways tilts, no salvaged ivies for runaway sweetness. Domestic rituals soon adapted. Hostesses timed gossip to slow milk counts. 1 cube equaled the polite reply, 2 an enthusiastic anecdote, and 3 a confession approaching mild scandal. Soldiers returning from frontier duty discovered the cubes aligned perfectly with the width of their regulation compass cases, a coincidence later recorded by quartermasters as optional morale equipment. Children measured birthdays by cubes, towered until collapsed 11 millimeters, stacking into small monuments of impending cake. A clockmaker in Graz crafted an hourglass filled with miniature cubes. Each drop chimed against glass with porcelain understatement, and visitors, entranced, forgot the hour entirely. Winter pressed on. In Prague coffee houses, waiters learned to flick cubes from silver tongs into cups without splashing, a trick judged by patrons according to ripple diameter. The bravest aimed for silent entries. Sugar surrendered to coffee beneath the surface, like divers respecting cathedral silence. One barista annotated a ledger of successful silent drops, hoping to publish a treatise titled Hydrodynamics of Courtesy. The manuscript, alas, dissolved in a flood of spilled espresso, proving coffee may critique ambition. Meanwhile, postal authorities introduced cube-rate parcels, small wooden crates priced by how many sweet blocks snugged into a tight mosaic. Philatelists collected the sugar-scented stamps until humidity coaxed ants into exhibit halls, prompting urgent redesigns involving varnished ink. Yet even standard perfection invites rebellion. A Paris confiser launched demi-cubes, 5- and -a- millimeter miniatures, claiming they flirted rather than furnished, ideal for absinthe, spoons balancing over green storms. Vienna responded with the Salon slab, a cube stretched long as a matchstick, capable of sweetening entire kettles at once. Critics called it opulent, then quietly ordered 2. The Imperial Board raised a scholarly eyebrow, penned a polite footnote reminding citizens of 11mm serenity, and trusted market gravity to restore equanimity. Sure enough, demi-cubes proved fiddlier than lace gloves in humidity, and slabs jammed samovars beyond patience. The neat block 33 millimeters around, if traced with gentle fingertip, remained unbeaten in the long race between fuss and appetite. Spring-thawed ledger ink. Botanists, curious about refinery waste, requested broken cubes for soil experiments, sowing nasturtiums in sweetened earth. Blooms emerged slightly candied, petals sticky enough to attract gossiping bees. The resulting honey, faintly crystalline, set harder in jars, causing breakfast knives to bounce with cheerful resistance. A newspaper dubbed it Toast Gymnasium, inspiring a wave of muscular metaphors that got lost beneath butter. In parlors, pianists began placing a cube atop, middle C during rehearsal. If vibration nudged it even 0.5 millimeter, they deemed the touch too brusque. Conservatories adopted the practice, and soon recitals smelled faintly of caramel when stage lights warmed forgotten cubes. Railway dining cars embraced standard cubes as rolling. Calibration devices, stewards gauged carriage sway by noting which rim the cube touched first in a saucer of tea. A left tilt predicted tunnels. A right tilt signaled culinary braking zones. Passengers dozed, lulled by gentle clinking as sugar made micro-pilgrimages across China, always 11 millimeters tall, yet traveling continents in slow centimeters. One poet, half awake, likened the cube's journey to empires drifting toward. Sunset, an analogy he admitted was probably sweeter than accurate. Decades drifted into electric light. Factories automated most steps, but the molds never widened, never shrank. Wartime rationing shrank supplies. Still, the cubes issued were filed to the trusted edges, a comforting geometry amid shortage. Soldiers wrote home describing ration tea brightened by a single perfect brick, and families measured hope itself by that small predictable weight. After peace, color flirted. Pale brown, unrefined blocks, rose-tinted novelty cubes for Valentine breakfasts. Yet whether charcoal, amber, or blush, each face remained an 11-millimeter promise that love and glucose respect foundational rules. Now, dusk settles over a quiet kitchen anywhere. Rain chatters against the sill, the teapot sighs, and a lone saucer waits. Your hand reaches the sugar bowl, fingers finding a cube warm from proximity. You let it rest on the spoon, a small cold moon, then tilt it into the cup. It lands with. The softest clap begins surrendering edges to swirl, and you watch the liquid caramel spiral like galaxies rehearsing bedtime. Count, if you wish. 1 second for corners to round, 3 for light to bend, 5 for tea to taste a faraway cane. Fields and patient legislation. The teaspoon circles once, twice, gently, never clinking the rim, and the cube is gone. But its certainty lingers 11 millimeters of remembered order swimming now through porcelain warmth. If your eyelids lower at this tempo, picture endless. Rows of wooden crates rolling down quiet conveyor belts, each releasing perfect white dice into burlap pockets. Imagine them waiting in pantries and railway buffets and brass-handled bowls atop grand pianos. Hear distantly the faint crystalline pop as one cube breaks from the mold, and the equally soft sigh when another dissolves into evening cup after evening cup. Feel the stir of spoon-slow vortex drawing loose ends of thought into sweet coherence, smoothing corners just as water smooths sugar. Let the quiet arithmetic of 4 grams and 11 millimeters cradle you where numbers drift into flavor, and drift until the mind itself melts, leaving only hush, warm and absolute. At last. You might not expect the proper length of an examination pencil, the stubby wooden soldier that trembles between nervous fingers, to have merited a ministerial decree. Yet on a chalk-dusted April afternoon in 1932, the Imperial Office of Scholastic, materials convened in a London hall that smelled faintly of eraser crumbs and damp mortarboards, to decide that every pencil issued for public examinations must arrive precisely 4 3/4 inches long, freshly sharpened to a conical, point no steeper than 35 degrees. If you're still awake by the time we drift to the proctor who tried, in commendable earnest, to gauge student confidence by counting the curls of graphite dust spiraling from each stroke, you could subscribe. Though truly, let the button up. The pencils will continue their quiet arithmetic whether or not any thumb remembers to press it. The committee began by unboxing specimens from every county, lanky 8-inch sticks from Kent, better suited to fencing than writing, squat 3-inch stumps from Liverpool, so small they threatened to vanish up coat sleeves, and one over-lacquered novelty from Brighton whose paint smelled of oranges and hubris. They stacked the pencils like matchsticks and listened to the click each made when tapped on a slate tile, believing that the right length should produce a note neither boastful nor bashful. 4 inches sounded terse, 5, indulgent, but at 4 3/4 the wood chimed a soft middling talk, as though acknowledging both haste and reflection. Calculations ensued. A point ground to 35 degrees wore down at a rate that, according to one bespectacled statistician, matched the patient's curve of average candidate's study for the first page, fraying mildly by the essay, then surrendering. Just as invigilators called time, Factories along the Thames hurried to trim existing stocks. Rotary saws hummed a lullaby of uniformity, slicing longer rods into obedient segments. Blades left faint scorch lines perfumed like distant campfires, but sandpaper smoothed them to a satin hush. Sharpening machines whirred, curling ribbons of cedar that fell in fragrant heaps, later bagged and sold to soap makers who liked their laundry to recall old classrooms. Quality inspectors adopted a new tool, the regulation stick, drilled with a hole exactly 4 3/4 inches from its butt. A pencil passing through flush earned a nod, while any that peeked beyond. The far rim faced immediate decapitation by guillotine blade. Thereafter, each compliant stub slid into a cardboard quiver stamped EP4 3/4 in green inky for examination. P for pencil, the fraction a quiet promise of sufficiency. Headmasters collected the shipments like Christmas parcels. On test. Morning they stood at hall doors, dispensing pencils the way priests give blessings. Palm up, gentle tap, next. Students marveled that every cylinder felt identical. No excuse now to bargain for the longer one. Desks, arranged in regimented grids, showed rows of brand new stubs pointing east like compass needles awaiting instruction. Some candidates performed tentative practice strokes, small arcs, tiny serifs, observing the even sheen left by graphite. Ground to committee tolerances? One girl whispered that the point resembled a church spire. Her neighbor, more pragmatic, thought of barn roof angles resistant to winter snow. Either way, the first answers etched steady, the graphite dust collecting. In tranquil half-moons along desk-grain little gray smile lines charting progress, and vigilators noted changes. Fidgeting declined. No one wasted seconds searching pockets for wayward stationery. Broken tips became rarer because 35 degrees allowed flexibility without surrender. When breakages did occur, often under the stress of an algebra misfire, proctors produced replacement stubs from velvet-lined tins, each identical to the first, so tests resumed without drama. One supervisor claimed he could predict a candidate's eventual grade by measuring how far the pencil shortened by final bell. High scorers left barely a 1/4 inch of cedar corpse, average writers a 1/2 inch, daydreamers scarcely dulled the lacquer. His graph, presented at a conference downwind from tea biscuits, drew polite applause and immediate disagreement, ensuring future conferences had something non-political to debate. Winter that year tested the decree. Sub-zero mornings numbed fingertips, making shorter pencils harder to clutch. Some teachers petitioned for mitten allowances, but the board replied with felt grips, tiny sleeves that slid on and off without lengthening the barrel. The woolly add-ons looked like miniature scarves and quickly became collectible. Pupils swapped colors before bell, then parked the accented pencils on desks like snowmen with jaunty mufflers. Spring thaw melted the fad, yet the length standard persisted, a metronome of wood and graphite. Of course, someone tried to innovate. A firm in Birmingham unveiled the Examendurance pencil, boasting a hollow core filled with compressed lid sticks that could be pushed forward as points wore down, an infinite pencil in finite housing. Demonstrations impressed fairgoers until the mechanism jammed mid-essay, leaving test takers poking at pages with blunt sadness. Another entrepreneur offered scented lacquer lavender for calm, peppermint for alertness, but exam halls soon reeked like confused herb gardens, and markers complained the papers smelled louder than the prose. Stability reclaimed the day. Simple cedar, uniform length, whisper frail scent of graphite, and silence thick enough to measure with a ruler. Years turned. Ink pens courted popularity, but pencils lingered where erasures felt safer than crossings out. Universities adopted the 4 3/4 standard for entry exams, citing the comforting continuity from childhood tests. Graduates kept souvenir stubs, half-gnawed, bundled with letters of admission. proof that neat dimensions sometimes shepherd large dreams. During wartime rationing, would supplies shrink? Still, the Minister of Education decreed that examination. Pencils must meet the old measure, reasoning that hope in inches outweighed austerity in splinters. Factories substituted local larch for imported cedar, giving stubs a paler complexion but leaving length untouched. Soldiers sitting makeshift, exams under canvas wrote histories that smelled faintly of pine and resolve. Eventually calculators colonized desks. Then laptops illuminated halls that once echoed with scratchings. Yet proctors, wary of batteries, still distributed the ritual stubs for diagrams, for emergency arithmetic, for comfort. Students swirled them like wands, finding the balance point unchanged after decades. Museums filed unopened quivers next to rulers and ink blotters artifacts of quiet governance. Curators observed visitors pausing longest at the pencils, perhaps hearing in cedar silence the murmur of pages turned under tall windows. Now, evening pools around whatever room you occupy. Imagine a wide hall lit by dusty skylights, rows of oak desks stretching into hush. A single pencil lies before you, 4 3/4 inches of possibility, point glinting in half light. You lift it. Wood feels cool, weight slight, but certain. Graphite kisses paper, maybe a word, maybe just a line, and a curl of gray shaves itself free, drifting down like the world's smallest feather. Another stroke, another curl. Soon the point rounds imperceptibly, time recorded in millimeters. Surrendered to thought. Across imagined rows, others write. The soft scissors of cedar on fiber weaving a blanket of unhurried concentration. Count. 8 breaths. The length, perhaps, of a sentence, and pencil is shorter by a whisper. Count. 8 more. The room recedes. Only the steady dialogue of lead and paper persists, steady as tide, soft as snow thickening on windowsills. Feel how each mark settles, graphite crystals lodging into pulp valleys, permanent yet quiet. When the lead dulls enough to catch on, a fiber, you turn the barrel, finding a fresh edge, until eventually even edges fade. Still, there's wood left, an inch, maybe 2, enough for notes that can wait until morning. If your eyelids now hover at that half-closed angle of acceptance. Place the pencil gently beside the paper. Listen, nothing breaks, nothing clicks, just the faint hush of cedar agreeing to rest. The hall imagined or remembered fades into a blur of parallel desks, each pencil equally reduced, equally certain. Outside, perhaps, a clock shifts its minute hand. Inside, breath and stillness align. And the small stub, once 4 3/4 inches, waits for next thought or for none at all. A modest measure of purpose letting every corner of mind round into sleep. You might not expect the gap between 2 iron lampposts, those lanky sentinels that glow like thoughtful commas along the street, to have occupied a full winter of municipal wrangling. Yet on a sleet silver morning in 1875, the London Committee, for nocturnal visibility, huddled in a drafty depot that smelt faintly of wet horse and overheated paraffin to decide that every new gas lamp erected within the city must stand exactly 71 feet and 6 inches from its neighbor. Measured, center to center, no alley nor crescent accepted. If you're still awake by the time we shuffle to the surveyor who tried, with touching persistence, to measure civic optimism in candle power per cobblestone, you could subscribe. Though please don't let your arms strain. The lamps will keep their quiet arithmetic, whether or not any finger remembers to tap. The debate started with red-nosed lamplighters reporting that uneven gaps forced them to jog unpredictable marathons. Each dusk sometimes sprinting 50 feet, sometimes strolling a leisurely 100-mile citizens complained the lurching glow pools left pockets of respectable gloom where misplaced puddles plotted ambush. A railway engineer proposed spacing lamps exactly 1 rail carriage length apart so commuters might feel at home. A poet suggested the distance of an average sigh, difficult to quantify in frost. Finally, a draftsman, nibbling the end of a frostbitten pencil, produced a figure 71.5 feet, claiming it aligned with the natural fade of a number 3 mantle at half pressure just before midnight. The number looked neither round nor ragged, pleasant as a lazy hum, and the committee, weary of puddles, accepted it like a blanket they did not mind sharing. Foundries clanged awake. Iron columns, 14 feet tall, with a subtle Corinthian shrug at the top, were cast in molds dusted with soot that smelled like burnt toast. Apprentices trimmed flash lines while foremen paced with a new regulation chain, 1 link per inch. Bright zinc against January haze. Street gangs of fitters carried the chains after midnight, stretching them along curbs as though measuring the city for a timid waistcoat. Whenever the 71st foot and 6-inch link kissed a chalk mark, they sank a post hole, rammed gravel, and bolted the column until it sang a single low note, somewhere between a yawn and a promise. By dawn, fresh rows of lamps leaned at identical attitudes, glass globes covered in calico to keep curiosity from smudging them before lighting time. Cockney sparrows watched the process, chirping commentary no clerk dared record, less minutes. Acquires sarcasm. Whenever a column listed more than a teaspoon off vertical, a foreman wedged a slate shard beneath its base, muttering that perfection preferred small secrets. Residents noticed first not the light but the rhythm. Evening drizzle revealed puddles now spaced like sensible ellipses instead of chaotic question marks. Umbrellas clicked pavement at predictable tempos, tap, step, tap. Step and skirts no longer risked surprise splashes between yawning dark zones. Lovers strolling after supper found their silhouettes passing from glow to glow in steady cadence. If one timed a whispered compliment to begin under one lamp, it would end precisely as the next halo arrived, framing blushes in orderly amber. Shopkeepers mapped window displays so a lamplight would crown their headlines every third pane, an arrangement that made even stale rock cakes look intentional. One tobacconist claimed the regular glow improved cigar sales by revealing just enough curl of smoke to entice without exposing price tags. Statistics proved inconclusive, but the story glowed warmly in trade circulars. Winter fog soon auditioned the standard. Yellow lenses fought pea soup vapor at regimented intervals, carving tunnels of honey through fleece-thick air. Omnibus drivers, steered by counting lamps, 7 evenly spaced columns until the bakery corner, 4 more past the chemist, then the squeal of brakes before the river bridge. When a rogue lamppost near Holborn leaned after a dray collision, drivers miscounted, turning early and producing a brief ballet of startled horses. Repair crews righted the post overnight and tightened every anchor bolt on the route, reaffirming that 71-foot lullabies dare not hiccup. A natural philosopher set up a chronograph, recording how long a moth lingered inside each cone of light before flitting onward. He concluded with academic serenity that insects respect geometry even when oblivious. His paper, on lepidopteran, loyalty to municipal grids, earned polite applause and immediate oblivion, much like the moths. Variations fluttered in. A Parisian delegation suggested globe-shaped lanterns could widen spacing to 80 feet without gloom. Trials showed the globes collected rain like goldfish bowls and warped reflections into ghostly ovals that unsettled cab horses. Glasgow engineers offered taller posts with stronger jets, but the flame hiss scared nearby laundry lines into perpetual flutter. London held to 71.5, content that enough glow should spill onto doorsteps for keyholes to feel found, yet leave bedroom. Curtains unharassed. Meanwhile, a boot polish firm painted 1 lamppost every half-mile in glossy black enamel, claiming it mirrored shoes so commuters could admire their shine between strides. A marketing ploy foiled when soot dulled the finish by Tuesday dot as electricity. Tiptoed into districts, tungsten bulbs replaced mantles. but voltage was tuned so halos echoed the old gas radius progress, politely wearing vintage trousers. Fitters swapped brass faucets for copper wiring, yet left columns and spacing untouched, reasoning that electrons travel too quickly to be annoyed by Edwardian math. During blackout years, lamps were shrouded, leaving only slitted cowls. Even so, crews inspected spacing with tape reels after bomb damage, convinced regularity and darkness still mattered. Post-war neon flirted with corners, but main avenues clung to their iron lineage. Columns now wearing aluminium caps like silvered dandies, yet standing steadfast in their quiet march. Tonight, if you wander any hush-heaped London street rain tickling gutter lids, distant taxis droning, you can still pace the old measure. 7 strides, 8 if strolling, from one glow circle into the next, each breath leaving your lips just as the following lamp warms your collar. Listen to the hiss or faint electric. Hum above. Sense puddles reflecting amber moons, precisely spaced like coins on velvet. One could, if inclined, measure worries in lamppost intervals. Release a fret at column 1. Feel it fade by column 2. Watch mist swallow the echo by column 3. Curbstones remember the chain's cold ring. Iron remembers the day it sang into place. Even fog seems to coil according to ordinance, thickening then thinning as if reading minutes from 1875. If your eyelids hover in that soft, half-closed pause, imagine the city skeleton under sleep. Thousands of identical iron vertebrae, 71 foot 6 inch, apart, holding a spine of hush through nightly breathing. Picture lamplighters of memory, their poles swinging, touching flame or filament, each spark bowing exactly where a draftsman once pressed pencil to parchment. Hear faint ticks of settling metal, the sigh of glass cooling, the distant shush of wheels on wet stone. Count the columns receding into calm 1 glow, 2, 3, until numbers blur, puddles soften, and the street-length lullaby carries you quietly, predictably, ever so gently into sleep. You might not expect the quiet little mouth in a red pillar box, the slit that greets every letter with tin-lipped composure, to have commanded a full year of post office soul-searching, yet on a mist-paled February dawn in 1885, the Royal Mail. Engineering board assembled in a drafty shed behind, Steve Martin's Legrand to decree that every posting aperture henceforth must stretch exactly 8 3/4 inches across. No wider, no worse, lest envelopes wander into mischief. If you are somehow still awake by the time we amble to the clerk who tried, with touching optimism, to measure public confidence in millimeters of slotware, you may feel free to subscribe. But do let the thought stroll. The boxes will keep their quiet arithmetic. Whether any finger presses a bell or simply yawns at it, early pillar boxes were a cheerful chaos. One from Liverpool flaunted a grin nearly a foot wide, swallowing girths of butchers' invoices with carnivorous ease. Another outside bath pursed itself to 6 inches, forcing love letters to fold as shyly as origami swans. Complaints tapped along telegraph wires. Landladies whined that rent demands returned chewed at the corners. Publishers moaned that prospectuses jammed like stage curtains stuck at half-rise. And schoolboys, discovering narrow slots, invented new creases that made teachers suspect secret codes. So the board laid a row of box fronts on trestles and fed. Them envelopes thick, thin, perfumed, disheveled, while a stenographer noted the sounds each one made. Scrape, sigh, dignified shuffle. 8 inches murmured hungry, 9 bragged. But at 8 3/4 there came a comfortable thunk, the acoustic of polite certainty, and the committee exhaled the way window glass fogs when worries leave the room. Foundries from Wolverhampton. To Ipswich received the decree, aperture width 8.75-inch stop height, 1 inch and a halfpenny stop corners rounded to prevent paper snag stop. Mold patterns were shaved, re-chalked, and blessed with a dab of lampblack to discourage rusts. Early ambitions. Cast iron fronts cooled on gravel beds, their fresh slots dark as new moons. Apprentices wielded a device soon famous as the regulation roll, a brass strip exactly 8 3/4 long, beveled like a well-mannered sword. If the strip slid through the slot without daylight on either side, the casting earned the tap of approval. If it rattled loose or wedged tight, the inspector chalked a white X and sent it to the grinding wheels, where sparks argued briefly with shadows. By December, dozen after dozen crimson cylinders waited on loading docks, each face smiling the same measured grin. Villagers noticed first in the hush before breakfast. They trudged across frost-blanched greens toward the post and found letters, slipping home with a satisfying shuff, as though the slot were inhaling exactly what appetite required. Milliners discovered hatbox receipts no longer caught mid-cheek. Solicitors applauded that deeds went through flat, leaving corners crisp enough for signatures to feel admired. One alderman measured civic morale by eavesdropping on footsteps. Fewer pauses at boxes meant fewer silent mutterings, he claimed, though his ledger of tread intervals convinced only him. Children, always experimental, posted pencil shavings, breadcrumbs, a single snail, rescued and pardoned, yet each curiosity passed cleanly through. Neither pinch nor loss proof, they declared that the new size bordered on magic. Spring rain lacquered the pillars to sleek garnet. Water droplets queued along the slot's lower lip, spaced like semicolons mastering grammar. Postmen, shouldering leather satchels, praised the opening for sparing fingers awkward wrestling with oversized catalogs. Slips slid smoothly and gravity did the rest. A playwright posted the first draft of Act I, in a sudden burst of confidence. Thick typescript that once would have begged a trip to the counter, then stood listening, convinced he heard future applause echo inside cast iron. Walls. The echo turned out to be a sparrow scolding the drizzle, but the dramatist remained optimistic on principle. Summer heat coaxed new games. Office clerks held lunchtime competitions, flicking wage packets 20 paces toward the box. Any envelope that entered first try without dog ear counted double glory. Bookmakers at pub corners briefly offered odds until a supervisor confiscated the betting chalk, claiming official stationery already carried sufficient risk. Meanwhile, chemists observed that the sun-warmed slot left faint iron kisses along. Gummed flaps, a pattern so regular one apothecary used it to align labels on cough syrup bottles. He called the technique postal straightening, though customers simply admired the new neatness without paying extra. Then autumn fog arrived, rolling through alleyways like cautious applause. Lamps pulled amber around pillars, making the slots gleam with lighthouse seriousness. Composers at nearby theaters timed overtures to the clank of each collection. Timpani rumbled deep as mailbags swung. Violins flickered like stamps being licked in unison. One conductor insisted the G-sharp in bar 12 derived from the hinge squeak of the Bloomsbury box at midnight. Critics shrugged, but the audience sighed contentedly in velvet gloom. Such was the season's hush, letters inhaled by iron melodies, exhaled by orchestras, both keeping faithful to an invisible tape measure conceived on a February morning. Inevitably, novelty tiptoed in. A Birmingham machinist designed a box with twin slots stacked vertically, small upper lip for postcards, generous lower grin for parcels, both trimmed to 8 3/4 wide. Trials showed citizens froze mid-decision, juggling options. Until queues formed, the machinist withdrew, citing the public's inability to choose happiness. A Paris manufacturer unveiled an oval slot he claimed coaxed love letters to curve gracefully. London inspectors tested it and found envelopes bent, like wounded doves, and issued a curt non. The standard plain, rectangular, predictable endured, humming self-esteem beneath layers of fresh vermilion paint, war dimmed streetlights, but not the decree. Blackout hoods narrowed the slot's visible outline to a cautious slit, yet calipers inspected each new front panel, ensuring invisible edges conformed. Soldiers at the front trimmed letters to regulation width before stuffing haversacks, trusting the measurement like a compass to home. Sensors slicing envelopes with wartime. Scissors blessed the opening for delivering paper unruffled. Fewer tears meant fewer mysteries. When victory parades spilled confetti into gutters, sweepers found pillars standing calm amid ribbons, their slots unchanged, as if geometry itself had refused evacuation. Decades rolled. Fiber optic cables whispered future epistles, but Christmas still summoned pews at red cylinders. Holiday greeting cards, thick with glittery snow that threatened jamming, nevertheless slipped through the old aperture like festive sleds small enough for chimney lore. Telecom adverts predicted the end of paper. Pillars stood polite anyway, receiving apology notes for failed emails. One retiree, proud of schedule, posted a blank sheet daily at 9 to thank the box for steadfast opening hours. After his passing, the local postman slipped a thank you card addressed simply to the pillar, completing the loop, slot width duly untroubled. Now, imagine night settling over a quiet side street. Sodium lamps hum. Chimney pots exhale sighs of stored afternoon. Heat. A solitary box waits near the curb, paint muting to burgundy under lamplight, slot a small horizon of promised travel. You approach, perhaps only in thought, fingers brushing a stamp's raised crown before releasing an envelope to the hush within. It slides, shuff, nothing catches, nothing scrapes, 12 decades of specification guiding that gentle descent. Listen a moment longer. Somewhere, gears ready for dawn collection click into place. Somewhere farther, ink dries. Farther still, a kettle warms for the tea that will greet the letter on arrival. Yet here, between posting and delivering, only. The slot counts time, 8 3/4 inches guarding the threshold between intention and distance, if your eyelids find themselves heavy as unsealed wax. Picture a corridor of red sentinels receding down every London road, each aperture aligned by invisible rulers pulled taut from winter 1885. See drizzle bee along lower lips. Puddles mirror upper acorns. Lamplight frame the precise rectangles with halo hush. Hear distant footsteps, but focus on the breath pause when a letter leaves fingertips. That soft farewell bridging sender and night. Feel the underside of Iron Age smoothed by generations of brush sleeves. Then, while the city continues its silvered breathing, let the standardized gap, the modest promise that paper will pass unhurt, expand gently across thought until all remaining worries fold themselves, one by one, into sleep. You might not expect the humble length of a teabag string, the quiet cord that bridges. Steaming cup and patient fingertip to have summoned 57 tea men, 3 textile chemists, and an ex-admiral into one drafty boardroom, yet on a drizzle-padded morning in 1956, the United Kingdom. Tea council gathered above a Covent Garden warehouse to decide that every string dangling from every national tea bag must measure precisely 5 3/8 inches. Knotted once, no tassel, no tug. If you're still awake by the time we steep to the packer who tried, in commendable earnest, to time morale by counting the pirouettes of spent strings upon saucers, feel free to subscribe, or simply let the thought bob away like a leaf on quiet brew. The strings will keep their gentle arithmetic, whether any button is poked or prudently ignored. Dot trials began with an assortment that looked like puppet choreography abandoned mid-scene. 4-inch stubs from Glasgow, notched so short they dunked themselves in panic. 7-inch wanderers from Brighton, so long they tickled sugar bowls 2 places over. And 1 braided flamboyance from Bath, scented faintly of lavender and ambition. Testers lowered each specimen into identical porcelain cups, lined up like ivory. Soldiers, studying the angle at which citron dark seeped through muslin, 4 inches left fingertips scalded. 7 let tags flop against noses of polite drinkers, provoking clandestine shivers. Yet 5 3/8 allowed a serene dangle, tag resting just above rim, string taut enough to rescue the sachet without drenching cuffs, slack enough to swirl gracefully like a lullaby metronome. Someone wrote the figure on a paper doily, and in that moment the length seemed less decree than whispered reassurance. Thread mills from Lancashire to Cardiff, reset looms. Cotton twine twirled through wax baths until it glimmered with subdued purpose, neither slick nor obstinate. A new device, the regulation stick, appeared, a slim walnut slat carved with a swallowtail notch exactly 5 3/8 inches from its tip. Assemblers in steam-fogged halls tugged each string against the stick. If it fell shy, they sighed and retied. If it exceeded, they trimmed with scissors small as sparrow beaks. Knots were pinched to the thickness of a single tangled, thought tight enough that no stray fiber journeyed off to flavor accidental thread tea. Completed armies of sachets rustled into tin chests, smelling of linen closets and distant plantations, every tag stamped brew secure, in ink that turned sepia when dreams of biscuits drifted near. The public sensed the change as a polite murmur, like hymn books printed in a friendlier font. Morning break rooms discovered fewer splashes on ledgers. Midday train compartments smelled uniformly of assam rather than panic. Factory workers measured gossip in string twirls, 1 gentle. Rotation for office rumors, 2 for football predictions, 3 for confessions that maybe shouldn't have left hearts. A mathematician at Leeds University documented the spiral radius of descending tags and published a note titled Helical Tendencies and Steeping Implements, concluding somewhat bashfully that standardized twine produced a logarithmic. Calm. Only his cat read the footnotes, but the university archivist kept the pamphlet anyway, because cats are better critics than dust dot winter came testing form. Gloves made fingers clumsy, yet the mandated length allowed a gloved pinch without dunking wool into Earl Grey. Commuters balanced cups on radiator grates, and strings, cut neither generous nor miserly, hung in midair like quiet trouser pleats awaiting pleasantries. When snow stalled post, a North Country vicar strung finished tea bags into garlands across the nave, each knot precisely spaced, congregation impressed by how symmetrical contrition could look when brewed to its end. He credited the tea council. In the parish notes, parishioners sent them ginger loaves in thanks, proof that bureaucracy occasionally seasons kindness. Of course, novelty fluttered in. A Cornish entrepreneur launched conversation strings printed with fortune cookie trivia. How many miles to the moon? Thus time to plant runner beans, but the extra ink stiffened cotton, causing rebellious curls that flicked droplets onto. Lapels. A Glasgow firm experimented with elastic twine for yo-yo brewing. Early testers watched bags bounce merrily, then disperse leaves through perforations like confetti, turning cups into botanical snow globes. The council's response was a single raised eyebrow rendered in calligraphic memo, 5 3/8. Gentlemen, elastic with discretion. Novelty subsided, leaving the standard length smiling. Like a postcard no one remembers sending, but everyone enjoys receiving. Spring fairs adopted the measurement for contests. Fastest 3-dip infusion. Longest tag pirouette before stillness. Children traded wrapped sachets as if they were postage stamps, inspecting the cut for telltale slant that betrayed scissors notched 1 millimeter astray. Grandmothers used the twine to measure seedlings, believing tea-soaked cotton carried a blessing. Peas climbed string like polite mountaineers, and gardens smelled faintly of breakfast. A clockmaker designed a pendulum powered by the weight of a spent bag. It kept indifferent time, but brewed optimistic conversation. The London Science Museum requested the prototype, citing cultural resonance. The clock replied with a soft drip, Declining travel in favor of cupboard comfort. By the late 60s, electric kettles gurgled into kitchens, brewing faster storms, yet the chords held stature. Marketing waltzed in with continental length, strings aimed at fondue party 6 inches, plush red tag, but partygoers discovered extra twine-tangled fondue forks and comedic knots. Standard packets resumed dominance alongside quiet apologies. Students studying for exams draped used strings across notice boards as improvised abacuses. 5 equals 1 revision chapter. 10 a well-earned nap. 1 professor charmed graded. Essays with a dangling sachet for a bookmark, declaring no paragraph truly finished until it met the ghost of bergamot. Ration scares nudged ingredients, but spared the twine. Paper tacks thin to wafer translucence during austerity, yet cotton strands refused to shorten. Spies reputedly encoded messages by tying micronauts along standard length. 3rd knot from tag meant rendezvous. 5th meant abort. 7th meant bring ginger biscuits. Historians remain unconvinced, but shelves hold declassified diagrams of suspiciously teased-in twine, curling like sleepy question marks across archivists' microfilm screens. Whatever their truth, the strings, never divulged, content to brew and be discarded with quiet dignity. Now dusk curls around your teacup, perhaps only in imagination. Kettle size, porcelain listens, you open a fresh packet. The string unfurls to 5 3/8 inches, with the poise of a cat choosing sunlit floorboards. The bag sinks, water clouds, tag rests against rim, cotton taut enough to sing. A chord pitch only steam can hear. You wait the 3 slow breaths recommended by old railway timetables, then lift the cord, watching amber trail spiral like sleepy maple syrup. The bag sighs on the saucer. The string flops in a soft semicircle perfect. Radius rehearsed 1,000 afternoons. Sip. Steam fog spectacles of thought. Room edges soften. Somewhere beyond wallpaper, millions of identical lengths dangle from billions of cups, each measuring a moment between chaos and calm. Feel cotton fibers swell, release, give over. Hear drip against china, faintest pencil on prayer book. Count the seconds it takes twine to still. 1 for worry, 2 for wandering, 3 for warmth, 4 for weightless hush, 5 for first nod of evening. And then, with the half-inch to spare, let every corner of wakefulness slacken like damp cotton. Threads, surrendering with gentle inevitability into sleep.